Welcome to Planted, Finding Your Roots in STEM Careers. Journey with us as we navigate the winding path into plant-related careers with professionals who have taken root or are still branching out. I'm Meghan Wiesbrook.
And I'm Jessica Turner-Scoff.
Today we're talking about those early experiences in science, and we're excited to welcome our guest, Frank Balestri, to the show. It's great to have you here, Frank.
Thanks for having me.
Frank, you're a research assistant and plant healthcare technician currently at the Morton Arboretum, and you are soon to be full-time faculty in horticulture at the College of DuPage. Now, horticulture is one of those words that most people are really familiar with what it is, just not the word itself. So would you care to define it?
Horticulture is simply the art, science, and business of growing plants. Horticulture is vital for food security, clothing, beautiful landscapes, and it is essential for conservation.
Yes, I'm actually involved with a national initiative called Seed Your Future, and it's all about promoting the viable and vibrant career opportunities that horticulture can provide. They did some research recently, and they found that 0% of the middle schoolers that they interviewed and had focus groups with had ever heard of the word horticulture before, but it's absolutely everywhere, and it can be so important for foundations and careers in plant science and conservation, and just really the world, the sky's the limit. Let's talk a little bit about your career and how you've landed in horticulture and how your path links together butterflies, mixed martial arts, and disease. Can we talk a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting group of three, isn't it? Well, when I was younger, I was really interested in butterflies. Right around the age of 4, I started collecting butterflies and caterpillars. And to do so, you have to find the right nectar and host plants to attract them to your yard. So I used to buy books and read a lot about them, and little by little I became more interested in plants. I also was gardening very often with my dad, growing tomatoes and cucumbers and those types of things. The mixed martial arts thing is something that I did and started early in college, late high school, and that's something that I do outside of work and school as a way to keep my life balanced. When I started working at the Morton Arboretum, part of my position is working in the pathology lab, diagnosing plant problems, many of them that are diseases. So that's how the disease is related to it.
Frank, we're really excited to hear about some of your early experiences in science around butterflies. I work in education, and getting to watch some of those, first experiences when kids really start to get excited about nature and being outside is one of the highlights of my current role. So we're excited to kind of see and listen to how those first experiences around butterflies kind of inspired parts of your career. And so why don't we just go ahead and dive right in?
Can you tell us a bit more about your current role at the Arboretum, especially since it's a split position?
Sure. So half my time is spent in the plant pathology lab where I'm diagnosing plant problems. These problems could range from insect damage to bacterial and fungal diseases. These samples are typically submitted from horticulturists on the grounds as well as from arborists outside of the Arboretum. The other half of my time is spent in the root biology lab conducting research on urban tree root systems. Our goals are to create root systems that can survive in urban environments where there are a lot of stressors.
So thinking about trees in urban environments, what are some things that are stressors that are put on the roots or happens to the roots that are kind of a negative structure that you wouldn't want to necessarily see for the tree to be productive?
Well, some of the stressors are compacted soil, limited root space, and fluctuation in temperatures. One thing you do not want in a root system is a circling root, which could eventually girdle the stem and cut off the water and nutrients to the top of the plant.
So a tree can literally hug itself to death there and kill itself that way.
Basically.
And so you probably want like really fibrous roots as well that don't circle around?
Yes, if you have a fibrous root system with a lot of root hairs, that increases the surface area for uptake of water and nutrients.
A lot like if you're drinking with 1 straw versus drinking with 5 straws, you're going to get a difference in volume going up.
Exactly.
It sounds like you get to do a lot of really interesting things in both your roles, and you get to wear a lot of hats a lot of the time. What would you say is one of the favorite parts of your split position?
I think the favorite part of my split position is probably working in the pathology lab. It's something that I have zero experience with before working at the Arboretum. When I was working on my master's degree, I was working with plant physiology and propagation, so I didn't really dive into pathology at all. and I tend to like challenges. So it was a challenge to learn how to diagnose these plant problems that I've seen before, but I wasn't really too familiar with what was causing them.
So back in high school, did you know that you wanted to be a faculty member in horticulture, or what was your actual dream job back then?
If I had to go back to high school, I don't think that I would imagine myself where I'm at today. I would probably picture myself in an F-18 Hornet, which is a fighter plane that's typically used in the U.S. Navy. That was a big dream of mine.
But now you get to work with plants and aerodynamic animals.
Pretty similar, huh?
So even before you had decided on fighter pilot, was there something else you were even more interested in at an even younger age than high school?
I think the theme is probably flight.
Okay.
I tend to always have an interest in things that fly. Since I was a kid, I was really interested in planes, particularly fighter jets, blimps, helicopters, butterflies. And maybe it's because I lived near the airport. I lived several blocks away, and the planes would fly over every minute. And the butterfly thing is what really led me into horticulture. So it's interesting how it all kind of connects.
So what type of hobbies did you have then when you were a kid?
I played a lot of sports, actually. I was very active. I played baseball. I was a pitcher, and I also played shortstop. Played basketball, bowled. I did a little bit of wrestling. And I also golfed. I really liked being outdoors. I think that's what I liked about golf. But I noticed that I spent more time in the rough looking for monarch caterpillars on milkweed than paying attention to the actual game.
Purposely slicing to get into that rough.
I know you also mentioned that you liked to garden with your dad. Did your interest in gardening at all kind of drive you into more of a science-related or horticulture-related field?
I think so. Like I said, I was always interested in gardening, and I never really realized that it could be a career, though. So it was always just a hobby for me. And it wasn't until later on that I realized that I could actually potentially do this as a career. My parents let me build a flight house in my yard.
Oh, that's
wow.
cool. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. We built a flight house with my good friend in late high school, I think it was. And we built it attached to the garage. It was 20 feet long, 8 feet high, and 8 feet wide.
That's huge.
And it is. It's pretty big. It's still there today.
For somebody who's maybe not familiar with a flight house, can you kind of describe what it looks like or what it's used for?
Yeah, so basically it's a structure that is covered in mostly mesh. We have some greenhouse panels on parts of it. And the butterflies are released in there, and they're able to fly around with a lot of space. And they could do what they pretty much do in the natural on their own. They could mate, they could nectar on flowers, and they could also lay eggs in the host plants. And if you have enough of the host plants there, the caterpillars could actually just survive in there and repeat the cycle again.
From a conservation standpoint, how important is it to participate and if you know what you're doing and you're up to date on all the current information, how valuable is it to raise those caterpillars and then eventually release them?
It's very valuable. A very small percentage of eggs laid by female butterflies actually survive to the adult stage. I believe it's under 5%. And it's particularly important with the monarch butterfly, which has been having some problems in the recent years because of the decline of milkweed plants around the country.
And why is milkweed declining?
Well, milkweed is native to prairie areas, which were typically turned into agricultural land, so they're tilled up and they're sprayed. And the monarchs can't survive without it, basically.
Well, Frank, you've inspired both Jessica and I because we are currently raising monarch butterflies to release them in our yards.
I hope to have you hooked on them.
He has caused such an obsession at the Morton Arboretum with butterfly raising. It's been so much fun. A lot of water cooler talk these days is geared around what stages are your caterpillars in? So, and, of course, butterflies, they provide so many value, they're so important for the ecosystem. Can you touch on that?
Sure. Well, butterflies, just like honeybees and other insects, they pollinate flowers, which are very important for reproduction.
Frank, in listening to your passion for the conservation of butterflies, and then also kind of how you have, nurtured this from gardening with your dad and then picking out different plants to attract butterflies, building a flight house, maybe purposely or not so purposely slicing into the rough to check out the milkweed. It seems like this is something that you kind of nurtured over an earlier part of your life. Were there any courses then when you started to be in later high school or early in your associates and then in your undergraduate where you were drawn more to different courses? Any that stand out as you think about some classes that you took?
Well, it's kind of funny because when I was in high school, I literally hated biology and chemistry and any type of science, even though I was still interested in the horticulture hobby outside of school. When I was in community college, I also didn't enjoy the biology classes or chemistry very much, but I did take a botany class. It was either my freshman or sophomore year in college, and I really enjoyed that part of it, especially the plant identification parts of the class. And I was starting to think that was kind of the area that I wanted to go towards. And after the semester was over, the teacher came up to me and she's like, you'd really be a good botanist or horticulturist. You should really think about going into it. And then after that, that's when I started to narrow my focus into horticulture and kind of go down that path.
Were there any other signs, so to speak, along the way?
Ooh, there was a sign, actually. It's pretty crazy. When I picked up my course catalog book from the community college, there was a large monarch butterfly on the cover. And I believe there was a monarch caterpillar on there also. And my mom and I looked at each other, and right then I knew I made the right decision. Even though that was a little earlier on, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I felt like I was on the right path.
Were there any early internships that really impacted how you shaped your career?
I interned at the Morton Arboretum during the summer of 2012, between my junior and senior year of undergrad. And during that time, I rotated through every department within the Arboretum, so I got a really good understanding on how the Arboretum functions and how it's managed. And during that time, I spent a lot of time with trees, as you can imagine. And I
that is our specialty.
Yep, we're the best around. I developed a really strong affinity towards trees and woody plants in general.
I think it's just one of those great examples of how, having this early internship really helped you understand what you wanted to do, provided great perspective, and really was a stepping stone for you to decide that, here you are now going to be a full-time faculty teaching horticulture. But it also really provided a foot in the door at the Morton Arboretum for you. So it's one of those things that, if you get an internship and you prove that you're smart, that you're capable, that you're a hard worker, if something eventually opens up, there might be an opportunity that, that could end up as a job someday. So I think it's just another excellent example of why internships are so important for early career decisions.
So knowing that you're kind of still moving along your career path and that you have kind of a big, transition on the horizon, what can you share with us a short-term goal that you have?
Well, my current short-term goals are to get all of my lectures and my class materials ready for the fall, which is quickly approaching.
And what type of classes are you teaching?
So this fall, I'm teaching 2 different sections of soil science. I'm teaching one section of hydroponics/aquaponics, and then I'm also teaching a intro to horticulture class.
Exciting. What about a long-term goal?
Long-term goal, I'd like to really work on developing my teaching skills and learn to communicate with students very effectively with science.
Science communication, so important. Now, okay, we've talked a little bit about butterflies, and now let's talk more about them because they are fascinating. So let's dive a little bit more into that world of entomology, or the study of insects. Can you tell us, what makes butterflies so cool? Can you touch on their life cycle and multi-generational migration?
Sure. So the life cycle of a butterfly is a complete metamorphosis. So it has 4 stages. It has the egg, the larvae, the pupal form, and then the adult. The adult is the one that we typically commonly see flying around. And I personally think it's miraculous. I think the life cycle is amazing, how this caterpillar, which is feeding on the plant, pupates, and it turns basically into goo, and then reforms into that aerodynamic creature.
Just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous insect.
And then the adult butterfly, the female, is able to pick out the perfect host plant among all this vegetation, which is essential for the larva to survive.
Frank, as a current eraser of a monarch caterpillar who is about ready to enter into their chrysalis and begin to pupate.
Not to brag, but mine already are, so.
Wow. Mine will be soon. I'm anxiously awaiting. But knowing that life cycle, then once a butterfly emerges, it will start to look for a host plant mate and then look for a host plant to lay eggs. Can you kind of break down how butterfly migration occurs? Because I understand that it occurs kind of in stages based on generation. But can you dig a little bit more into that for us?
So the monarchs do what is called multi-generational migration. And the adult that is here in the fall doesn't actually make it down to Mexico. So what happens is the adult flies south for a certain distance, lays eggs. That generation will fly even farther south, lay eggs, and then that final generation will actually make it to Mexico.
And it's a really rare phenomenon in nature.
It's extremely rare, yes.
So I've got a fun story about the multi-generational migration. On one of my early dates with my husband, we went to an IMAX movie about monarchs, butterflies, and the guy that spent his whole life studying these insects. And no one knew where they went. No one knew. And so he spent his whole life, and this was in the middle of my dissertation. So here I am devoting my entire life to these research questions, and I'm watching this guy go through his journey. And at the very end of his life, he finds out that they all end up down in Mexico. And it was just this amazing moment for him to his life's work to actually see it. And so I'm in the IMAX theater losing it, ugly crying. And because it was just so moving and awesome. And my husband looks over at me with a face I will never forget. But guess what? He married me. So joke's on him.
Frank, we do also have a couple teachers who recently participated in an on-site workshop, and they saw your profile and a little bit about your career background and obviously your interest in butterflies. And they have a few questions that we wanted to get your insight on. One may be an easy question. This may be hard to narrow, but do you have a favorite butterfly?
My favorite butterfly is the eastern tiger swallowtail, and that's probably because it was so mysterious to me when I was younger. It was always a challenge to catch the butterfly itself, and I think it's because they typically fly higher up in the woods, especially around trees, and obviously I don't have a net that long. They also use host plants that are trees, and for example, tulip poplar, which is a very large tree. And if you don't have any small seedlings around to collect eggs from, it's really hard to get eggs in caterpillars, so I was never really able to raise them as a kid, and so it was a challenge, and it makes me really appreciate the butterfly.
Do you have any memorable stories about raising butterflies? Because this has been something you've been doing your whole life. Oh,
I do. I'm sure my mom would like this one. When I was younger, I would collect the caterpillars and I would put them in a container in my back room on the piano. And a lot of times I would leave the covers off because they would typically stay on their plants. They wouldn't travel around too much. But occasionally certain species would get anxious and start crawling all over the place, and they'd be all over the walls and the windows and stuff. And if this would happen in the fall, the older caterpillars would pupate in the room somewhere, either under my bed or under the piano. And when spring would come around, the butterflies would hatch, and there'd be swallowtails bouncing off the windows in the room. Or I'd always be nervous because someone would come and turn on a fan while I'm trying to catch it.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then another time in Florida, we were on vacation. I collected some caterpillars on a tropical plant outside of a hotel, and I put them in a cup with a napkin on top of it, and we went out to dinner. And when we came back, they were all over the room, and my mom was really mad. They were all over the beds and the walls and stuff, and they were really ugly caterpillars. They had bristles and spines all over them and stuff. So not the ones you want crawling around.
I love how supportive your parents were.
Oh yeah, they were great. Shout out to Mom and Dad. They were always super supportive.
Do you have any recent stories or memorable stories about catching butterflies?
I do. It happened about 2 days ago. I'm sure you two are familiar with it. So all of us here went out on a caterpillar quest, I believe we called it.
Yes.
So we were looking for caterpillars and eggs on the grounds at the Morton Arboretum.
Check out bonus content.
And we came across a giant swallowtail, which is pretty rare around here, and it literally flew right past us. It was probably within 5 feet when it first came past us, and we managed to collect it, and we're currently trying to get some eggs out of it.
Now, are you branching out to raise any other insects besides butterflies?
I am. My coworker Marvin and I have recently been raising silk moths, which are large moths that are around the size of swallowtails, and they could be even larger than that. The caterpillars are also a really ridiculous size. They almost look fake. They could be as long as your hand, and they're really fat. They look like a cartoon caterpillar, like a Pokemon or something out of It's a Bug's Life movie from Disney.
Well, we do have one last question for you, and it wouldn't be planted without us finding out what is your favorite plant.
Ooh, that's always a tough question, but I've recently been able to narrow it down to sweet Bay Magnolia, which is Magnolia virginiana. It's a tree that is native to the southeastern United States. It tends to grow in wet areas such as swamps, and it has glossy green leaves, white flowers that have a citrus scent to them. And it kind of blooms sporadically to late spring, which is different than other magnolias, which bloom earlier in the spring, kind of all at once, and is also the host plant of the eastern tiger swallowtail butterfly.
Full circle. Full life cycles.
Full life cycle.
Well, Frank, just thank you so much for coming and being on Planted today, especially, I'll forever have from that caterpillar quest this image of this mixed martial artist chasing butterflies. But it's just been a lot of fun hearing about your career, especially it's one of those that, hindsight 2020. And what you loved doing as a kid is now something that you can really have aspects of that as part of your job. So, just to our listeners, trust your gut, what you love doing. There might be a way to connect that to your future career and profession. So thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you for having me on here to share my journey with everyone.
This episode of Planted, Finding Your Roots in STEM Careers, was made possible by the Morton Arboretum and Multimedia Services at College of DuPage. Check out additional resources and bonus content at www.mortonarb.org/Planted Podcast. This is Jessica Turner-Scoff
And Meghan Wiesbrook.
and we hope you'll continue to join us as we journey into STEM careers.